From Facing the Lion, Growing Up Maasai on the African Savannah by Joseph Lamasalai Lakutin. Joseph Lamasalai Lakutin was born in rural Kenya to a tribe of Maasai nomads. In 2003, he graduated from Harvard University with a master's degree in educational policy. Before coming to the United States for college and university, Joseph balanced traditional Maasai initiation with his education. He now works to help build cultural bridges between Kenya and the United States, as well as spearhead the effort to build schools and support rural Kenyan educational systems. Background of the story. The Maasai people are East African nomadic herders who raise cattle. Their traditional Maasai diet is made up almost entirely of the meat, blood, and milk of their herds. In Maasai culture, boys undergo a series of initiation rituals and education as part of the process of becoming men. I had started to develop a new ambition toward the end of my time at the missionary school. I'd learned something about government, heard people in power on the radio, but I had never heard anything about our people being in power. Nomads are a minority in Kenya. We continue to live traditionally and haven't been well represented in government or other institutions. I was starting to learn something about that and to think that maybe I could help someday. As it happened, I had a cousin who worked for Kenya Wildlife at a place called Voi in southern Kenya near Mombasa. He allowed me to go down and stay with him for a year so I could attend a different school and retake the primary exam. When I did, I got all A's and I was accepted at a high school called Kabarak. Kabarak was a very prestigious school. It was sponsored by Daniel Arap Moi, who was then president of Kenya. Kabarak is in Nakuru in the Great Rift Valley, about 90 miles south of Nairobi. I was a poor nomadic kid, still very traditional in my outlook and my way of life. I didn't actually wear my red nanja when I went down there for the first time, but I carried it with me. I felt like everyone could see it, like I had the wrong clothes on. When I got to Nakuru, I found the school and walked up to the gate, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. I just sat down outside watching the cars drive in. Some of them were pretty fancy cars, too, Mercedes and the like. And there I was in my old patched school uniform. I finally got up my nerve. I walked up to the guard and I told him I'd come to be a student there. He chased me away. I went back across the street and watched some more. Finally, I went back and showed the guard my admission letter, and he let me in. Once I got through that gate, it seemed to take forever to get to the building where the guard said the new student should report. I was very shabby with my plastic garbage bag over my shoulder, and everyone was staring. I was so embarrassed it seemed like my legs couldn't carry me. One thing I remembered is that I never looked back at the gate. Never. I was so afraid the guard would call me back and tell me I had to leave. I just kept walking until I reached the building. Some of the other kids were like me, but not really like me. None of them were as ragged, and none of them looked as tired as I felt. I kept thinking about how I had so little money in my pocket, just enough to buy some bread at the canteen. Someone called out our names, and we were given our uniforms and sent to the dormitory. It was a big room with lots of bunks. I got a lower bunk. It was temporary housing because they were building a new dormitory. It wasn't really very good, but I liked it a lot. No rain came through the roof. It had the best bed I had ever slept on, and there was a shower in a building near the dormitory. I was in heaven. There were a lot of very healthy, very wealthy kids at Kabarak. They were some poorer kids too, but even they had some Western urban ways about them. They lived in the city. They spoke incredible English. They had television at home. And there I was. I didn't even know what a television was. I'd never seen one in my life. What I knew about was cows, so we didn't have a lot in common. When I talked about cattle, it was like, what are you talking about? They just laughed at me. It was culture shock in my own country. And even though I was different from the other kids, after the first shock, we got along well. I made a lot of friends there, and many of them are my friends today. I realized early on that I was one of the few nomads in the school, and that gave me courage, self confidence. At vacation time, the other kids at Kabarak went home to the city and hung out. I went to the cattle camp. It gave me an edge. I looked at my experience at Kabarak as another initiation as part of my preparation for life. Everything you do in our culture, you are preparing for the next stage. Everything you do in life is preparing you for the next challenge. The kids at Kabarak came from all over Kenya. Many different tribes were represented. It was like a little United Nations. We spoke either English or Swahili to each other. I guess it is how I started relating to people, mixing with all those groups. The elite in numbers and education were the Kikayu. There was also the Luo, the Luha, the Kalenjin, the Kamba, the Digo, and the Kisi. And they were a few nomadic students at Kabarak, and we were all from different parts of the country, but we were all in the same situation and we became friends. Some nomadic kids were really embarrassed to say where they were from, but I was proud. Still, sometimes I would wake up at night and wonder why I was there, why I was doing this. Every day there were little things and little symbols that showed I was not from the right class, that maybe I didn't belong there socially, and maybe I had stepped out of line by leaving my cows and coming to such an elite place. But I tried not to dwell on it. The school treated me like everyone else, and that was the most important thing. Although no one became a special mentor to me, I became friends with some of the subject teachers. The teachers were very good. Many came from Nairobi, some from Uganda. Two were British and one was American. The subjects were the same as at a good high school in the United States, although the curriculum was different. Slowly, I learned what to do and what not to do. One thing was sure, I was going to study really hard. My goal was to be successful and not let my family down. They had to sell 3 or 4 cows to pay the fees when I went to Kabarak. That was a lot of cattle for them. It's an expensive school. And there was a drought at the time, so there were few to spare. A lot of our cows had died that year. The funny thing about it was, I don't think they would have felt let down if I had quit and come home. They supported me, but school was not important to them. They would just have thought, well, he's come back to be a herder. Now we'll have enough people to work for us. But I was determined. The school was intense. Everyone was sharp. If you relaxed, you'd find yourself at the bottom of the class. The curriculum was quite specialized. You had to choose 3 core subjects and focus on them. Mine were economics, Kiswahili, and geography. This is what I felt comfortable with. The days were hectic. Wake up at 5:30 in the morning, classes begin at 8 and went on until 4, and then we'd go out for sports. Dinner was at 6, and then we'd go back to study until about 9. And keeping up with the schoolwork often meant even longer hours, getting up as early as 4 in the morning and not going to bed until 10 or 10:30 at night, sometimes even later. Everyone was required to live at school. The kids who came from the wealthier families around Nairobi always complained, but I loved it. I had never lived better. In the 3rd year, I was made perfect. A student who's given some responsibility for monitoring the other kids and running some school activities, and I had my own room. I always loved my holidays at home, but in the days before school closed, I'd have nightmares about how to get there. There was no problem getting from Nakuru to Isolo. You could take a regular passenger bus, but from Isolo to Marsabit, the only means of transport was on top of trucks carrying food and other goods to Marsabit. You had to climb up there and hang on, and it's about 200 miles, and usually it took a day or two depending on the condition of the truck you were riding on. Many of the trucks were old and in poor shape. I always tried to find a new one, but sometimes there was no choice. The roads were bad too, so bad that the trucks were always getting flat tires and there were bandits. It's a remote stretch of road, and there was always the danger of being attacked and robbed. Even getting on top of the trucks was a nightmare. The moment I arrived in Isolo, I would start looking for a ride. It was normal to spend 4 or 5 days trying. It was even worse during the raining season, when I would spend a week or two. The road to Marsabit was unpaved, and heavy rains could make it impassable. I never had very much money, and after a day or two looking for transport, I always ran out. Since I didn't know anyone in town, I'd spend the night sleeping in the open on the verandas of shops. It was dirty, and at night it would get very cold. Isolo has a lot of bars, and people leaving the bars would step on me. Most of the people sleeping on the streets there are homeless kids and orphans. I always felt like one of them when I slept out. I wouldn't get any apology when someone stepped on me, just insults. And then after a mostly sleepless night, I'd have to get up and start looking for a new ride. There's a police checkpoint in town. Students looking for rides gathered there, and the police would do their best to help. So long as there weren't too many of us, they would ask the drivers to give us rides. If there were too many, they'd chase us away. So I always made a point to get there early, around 4 a.m. With luck, I'd find a truck and get on my way. But even with luck, I was usually on the road for a week or more before I got home. Most of the other students at Kabarak lived in the big cities. They'd be home within 4 or 5 hours of school closing. And sometimes I'd get desperate. I would think about my mother, my brothers, and my friends, and about the cattle. At home, I could bear hunger and being out in the heat and rain because I'd be taking care of our livestock. Their beautiful horns and colors could make my hunger disappear. In a solo or on top of the truck driving the endless miles up to Marsabit, I sometimes felt like a beggar. But then I'd remember a good grade or something positive I'd achieved, like doing well in soccer. Or I'd think about the future, about what I could accomplish for my people with an education, and I'd find encouragement in that. The elders in the village taught us that a man who has gone through hardships will be most likely to enjoy success. And it would be a shame and an embarrassment after so many years learning even to think of quitting.